Ma'am, I need to see your papers right now.
Excuse me? I'm a U.S. citizen. You have no legal basis for this stop, officer.
Do you understand English? I said papers now.
Officer, you're violating my Fourth Amendment rights.
Just comply.
Officer, I'm Attorney Ashland, a state attorney from the Civil Rights Division.
Sure you are. We'll verify your story at the station.
The click of handcuffs closing around her wrists was the sound of Agent Knowlton signing away his career, his pension, and $8.7 million of taxpayer money. He was 34 years old, 6 years with ICE, and absolutely certain that the black woman in the sedan was lying. His partner, Agent Kenner, nodded in agreement as they placed her in the back of their SUV. What neither agent realized as they drove toward the station was that Kendra Ashland had spent 12 years as a federal prosecutor specializing in exactly one thing: destroying the careers of law enforcement officers who violated constitutional rights. She held a Georgetown law degree, an impeccable courtroom record, and photographic memory for federal statute numbers. Their body cameras were recording everything. Their incident report would contradict the footage. And the woman they'd just caged like a criminal prosecuted civil rights cases for a living. Knowlton and Kenner had confused a victim with an executioner, and they wouldn't realize their mistake until it was far too late. Kendra Ashland had spent 12 years building a reputation as the prosecutor federal agencies feared most. As Senior Deputy State Attorney for the Civil Rights Division, she specialized in dismantling unconstitutional practices: illegal searches, unlawful detentions, systematic violations of Fourth Amendment protections. Her Georgetown law degree and courtroom record spoke for themselves. She knew federal law better than most federal judges. That morning, she drove through a quiet residential neighborhood 3 miles from the courthouse. She'd just finished speaking to high school students about civil liberties and the Constitution. Her briefcase sat on the passenger seat, containing her state attorney credentials. Her badge rested in her purse. She was listening to Supreme Court oral arguments through her car's audio system, mentally preparing for an afternoon deposition. She didn't notice the unmarked SUV that had been following her for 6 blocks. When the auxiliary flashers activated behind her, Kendra's first thought was confusion. This wasn't a traffic stop zone. She hadn't been speeding. She checked her mirrors and saw 2 men in tactical vests exiting their vehicle, approaching from both sides of her car with purposeful strides. The passenger side agent rapped sharply on her window with his knuckles. Kendra lowered it halfway. "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle." "What's this about, officer?" The agent's face was impassive. "Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I need to see your identification and proof of citizenship." The words landed like a physical blow. Kendra's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from immediate recognition. She was being racially profiled, in broad daylight, minutes from her office, by federal agents who had no legal authority to conduct a random vehicle stop without reasonable suspicion of an immigration violation. The driver's side agent leaned toward her window, his voice sharp with impatience. "Ma'am, do you understand English? We need to see your papers. Now." Kendra's legal mind was already cataloging violations. No probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, no legal basis for this stop. These agents were about to receive the most expensive education of their careers. Kendra kept her voice measured, professional. "Officers, I'm a U.S. citizen. You've pulled me over without probable cause. What reasonable suspicion do you have that I've violated immigration law?" The passenger side agent, whose nameplate read Knowlton, stiffened visibly. "We don't need to explain our procedures to you. License and proof of citizenship. Now. Actually, under the Fourth Amendment, you do need reasonable suspicion to detain me. This is an unconstitutional stop." The driver's side agent, Kenner, moved his hand incrementally closer to his service weapon. "Ma'am, you need to comply. Step out of the vehicle." Kendra remained calm but firm. I'm not exiting my vehicle without legal cause. You're conducting an immigration stop on a person you have no reason to believe is not a U.S. citizen. You followed me for 6 blocks before pulling me over. That's a pretextual stop. It's illegal. Knowlton's face flushed red. You people always think you know the law. We have authority under 287G to conduct immigration enforcement. 287 doesn't grant you authority to conduct random vehicle stops without articulable, reasonable suspicion. Kendra countered precisely. You're currently violating my Fourth Amendment rights. I'm asking you again, what specific, articulable facts led you to suspect I'm not a U.S. citizen? The agents exchanged a glance. They hadn't expected resistance. They certainly hadn't expected someone who could cite federal statute numbers from memory. Kenner's tone hardened defensively. We received information about suspicious activity in this area. We're conducting a lawful investigation. What suspicious activity? A black woman driving through a residential neighborhood? Don't make this about race, Knowlton snapped. We're doing our job. Kendra recognized the deflection. She'd seen it in dozens of depositions. When officers couldn't articulate legitimate suspicion, they accused the victim of playing the race card. Then provide the specific articulable facts that justify this stop. I'm waiting. Silence. The kind of silence that fills courtrooms when defendants realize they have no defense. The kind of silence that precedes catastrophic mistakes. Kendra reached slowly for her purse on the passenger seat, making her movements deliberately visible. I'm retrieving my identification. Keep your hands where I can see them, Kenner shouted, his hand now gripping his weapon. Kendra froze. My identification is in my purse. You asked for identification. I'm complying. Get out of the vehicle, now. You're being detained. On what grounds? Failure to comply with a lawful order. Kendra felt the situation spiral into dangerous territory. These agents were doubling down, creating circular justification for detention. She was being detained for refusing an unlawful detention. It was a constitutional violation compounding itself in real time, each second adding zeros to the eventual settlement figure. She complied, stepping out slowly with her hands visible. The morning air was a bit cold against her skin. She noticed neighbors beginning to watch from their windows and porches. Knowlton grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her toward the back of her vehicle. Put your hands on the vehicle. You're assaulting me. I am not resisting. There is no legal basis for this use of force. You're being detained pending verification of citizenship status, Kenner stated mechanically, moving to pat her down. Kendra's mind raced through accumulating violations. Unlawful stop, unlawful detention, unlawful search, excessive force, battery. Each action was a separate civil rights violation, each carrying substantial federal liability. I'm a United States citizen. I'm a state attorney. My credentials are in my vehicle. You are violating federal law. Knowlton laughed, a short, derisive bark. Sure you are, and I'm the Attorney General. That laugh, that single moment of fatal arrogance, the moment when assumption and prejudice overrode basic professional protocol. They didn't run her plates. They didn't check her credentials. They didn't verify anything. They saw a black woman and assumed she was lying. Kenner pulled her arms behind her back. The metal handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists with brutal finality. You're making a catastrophic mistake, Kendra said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. My name is Kendra Ashland. I'm Senior Deputy State Attorney for the Civil Rights Division. My office prosecutes federal agencies for exactly this kind of constitutional violation. You need to verify my credentials immediately. Knowlton smirked, exchanging an amused glance with his partner. Right, and I'm sure you're also a lawyer. I am a lawyer. I have a JD from Georgetown Law. I've been a prosecutor for 12 years. I specialize in Fourth Amendment litigation. I know exactly what you're doing wrong, and I'm documenting every word of this encounter for the federal lawsuit I will personally file. The specificity should have warned them. The calm precision of her words. The legal terminology flowing naturally from someone who lived and breathed constitutional law. But they'd committed. They'd handcuffed a woman they believed was powerless. Backing down now would mean admitting error, acknowledging they'd violated rights without cause. So they pushed forward into catastrophe. "We'll verify your story at the station," Kenner said, guiding her toward their SUV with a firm grip on her arm. Kendra felt the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She cataloged the sensation for her eventual testimony. The metal pressed against bone. The position of her arms created pressure in her shoulders. This was excessive force, by any reasonable standard. Knowlton opened the rear door of their vehicle. The cage, the metal grating that separated law enforcement from detainees, from criminals. That's what they believed she was. They believed she was lying because they couldn't conceive of a black woman being a senior federal prosecutor. Their worldview didn't accommodate that reality. So they dismissed her words, mocked her credentials, and laughed at the truth. It would cost them everything. They placed Kendra in the back of their SUV. She sat in the cage, handcuffed, while Knowlton finally walked to her vehicle. He opened the passenger door and retrieved her purse with gloved hands, as if handling evidence. He unzipped it. The first item he found was her state attorney credentials, the official federal identification card with her photograph, her title, her authority. He stared at it for a long moment. Then her bar card, active member of the state and federal bar, in good standing. Then her federal courthouse security pass, the kind that granted access to restricted areas where only prosecutors, judges, and federal law enforcement could enter. Kendra watched through the metal grating as Knowlton's face transformed. The color drained from his skin like water from a breached dam. His hands trembled slightly as he held the credentials. He looked up at Kenner, his expression conveying complete horror. Kenner walked over. Knowlton showed him the credentials without speaking. Both men stood frozen beside her vehicle, staring at the undeniable proof of her identity. The power dynamic shifted with tectonic force. They'd detained a senior federal prosecutor. They'd handcuffed her. They'd mocked her. They'd laughed when she told them who she was. They'd assumed she was lying based purely on racial prejudice. And they'd done all of this while their body cameras recorded everything, every word, every action, every constitutional violation. Kendra sat in the cage, her wrists aching, and watched them realize the magnitude of their error. She'd prosecuted cases like this dozens of times. She knew exactly what happened next. The desperate scramble for justification, the attempts to reframe the narrative, the coordination of stories, the lies in the incident report. But this time, she was the victim and the prosecutor. She knew their playbook. She knew their defenses. She knew every avenue of escape they might attempt, and she knew how to close each one. Kenner approached the SUV slowly. His swagger had evaporated. When he opened the back door, his voice was small, cautious, and fundamentally changed. "Ma'am, Ms. Ashland, there's been a misunderstanding." Kendra looked at him steadily. No anger in her eyes, just a cold, professional assessment. The look she gave defendants right before demolishing their testimony. "Remove the handcuffs." Kenner's hands shook as he unlocked the handcuffs. Kendra stepped out of the vehicle, rubbing her wrists where the metal had bitten into her skin. Red marks encircled both wrists. Bruises would form by evening, documented injuries from excessive force. She looked at both agents directly. When she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. "You conducted an unconstitutional traffic stop. You detained me without reasonable suspicion. You handcuffed me without probable cause. You ignored my statements of citizenship and my offer to provide credentials. You laughed when I told you who I was. You assumed I was lying because you couldn't conceive that a black woman in this neighborhood could be a federal prosecutor. Knowlton attempted salvage. We were acting on information. What information? Be specific. I want the exact details of your tip documented in your report. Silence. Heavy, incriminating silence. There was no tip. You profiled me. You followed me because you made an assumption based on my appearance. You pulled me over hoping to find an immigration violation that would justify your racial bias. Kenner tried a different approach. Ms. Ashland, if we overstepped, Kendra cut him off sharply. If? There's no if here. You violated my civil rights. You conducted an illegal detention. You used excessive force. You falsely imprisoned me. And you did all of this while I repeatedly informed you of the law and my identity. She walked deliberately to her vehicle. Both agents stood frozen, unsure whether to follow. Kendra retrieved her phone from her briefcase. She opened the camera application. First, photographs of her wrists. Close-ups showing the red marks, the indentations from the handcuff edges, evidence of injury. Then, photographs of the scene. Her vehicle. Their SUV. The agents standing beside their vehicle, face ashen. Then she began an audio recording. Date, time, location. Full statement of events, speaking clearly and precisely. Every detail documented in her own words, while memory was fresh and adrenaline still sharpened clarity. The agents watched helplessly as she methodically built her case. They were law enforcement. They understood evidence. They understood what she was doing. She was treating them as defendants because that's exactly what they were. Kendra finished her audio statement and looked at both agents. I'm reporting this incident to your supervisors. I'm filing a formal complaint with the Office of Professional Responsibility, and I'm pursuing civil litigation under 42 U.S.C., paragraph through 1983 for deprivation of rights under color of law. Knowlton paled further. Section 1983 was the federal civil rights statute. Every law enforcement officer knew it. It was the mechanism by which citizens sued police and federal agents for constitutional violations, and it bypassed qualified immunity when the constitutional right was clearly established, which it was. Everything these agents had done violated clearly established Fourth Amendment law. Any reasonable officer would have known their actions were unlawful. Kenner tried once more. Ms. Ashland, we can work this out. We made a mistake. We'll apologize in writing. We'll work this out. Kendra's voice remained calm, but steel ran through it. You handcuffed me. You laughed at me. You conducted a racially motivated traffic stop without legal basis. This isn't something you can apologize away. She took several more photographs. The street, the neighborhood, the positioning of vehicles. Everything that might be relevant in litigation. Your body cameras recorded everything. Your vehicle cameras recorded everything. The footage will show exactly what happened here. I will obtain that footage through discovery. I will subpoena every communication you've had today. I will examine your stop patterns for the past year to establish a history of racial profiling. She wasn't threatening. She was simply stating the steps she would take. The methodical process of building an unassailable case. I prosecute federal agencies for constitutional violations. I know every defense you'll attempt. I know every argument your attorneys will make. I know every procedural obstacle they'll raise. And I know how to defeat every single one. The agents said nothing. There was nothing to say. They'd gambled that she was powerless, and they'd lost everything. Kendra collected her credentials, returned them to her purse, and got into her vehicle. You'll be hearing from multiple oversight agencies. I suggest you consult an attorney." She drove away, leaving them standing beside their SUV in the cold morning air. Within hours of Kendra's formal complaint, the machinery of federal oversight activated with unprecedented speed. The Office of Professional Responsibility opened an investigation. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General assigned investigators. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice launched its own inquiry. The agents' body camera footage arrived within days. It contradicted every element of their incident report. They'd written, "Conducted a traffic stop based on reasonable suspicion derived from community tips regarding suspicious activity." The footage showed no mention of any tips. Instead, it captured them following Kendra's vehicle for 6 blocks before initiating the stop. They'd written, "The subject became combative and refused to comply with lawful orders." The footage showed Kendra calmly explaining constitutional law, citing specific amendments and federal statutes, and complying with every physical directive. They'd written, "Stop duration approximately 5 minutes." The timestamp showed 23 minutes from initial contact to final departure. Every lie is documented, every fabrication exposed. Kendra filed her civil lawsuit. Professional ethics prevented her from handling it personally. She couldn't be both plaintiff and prosecutor. But she recommended attorneys who specialized in federal civil rights litigation. She provided her documentation: photographs, audio recordings, timeline analysis, legal memoranda detailing each constitutional violation. Her expert testimony was devastating. As a federal prosecutor specializing in Fourth Amendment cases, she explained precisely why each action violated clearly established law. She detailed the absence of reasonable suspicion, the pretextual nature of the stop, the excessive force, the false imprisonment. The defense attempted to argue qualified immunity. Kendra's attorneys demolished the argument. Every right violated was clearly established. Any reasonable officer would have known the stop was unconstitutional. ICE's attorneys reviewed the evidence, the body camera footage, the plaintiff's credentials, the lies in the incident report. They calculated the odds of prevailing at trial: 0. They calculated the likely jury award if the case proceeded: catastrophic. They settled $8.7 million, one of the largest settlements in a federal racial profiling case. The settlement was only the beginning. Agent Knowlton was terminated. Agent Kenner was terminated. Their law enforcement unions reviewed the body camera footage and declined to contest the dismissals. The evidence was too clear. The violations are too severe. Even union representatives couldn't defend what the cameras had captured. Both agents faced professional ruin. They lost their federal pensions. They lost their law enforcement certifications. They would never work in law enforcement again. But the consequences extended beyond 2 careers. Kendra's case triggered a comprehensive policy review within ICE. New protocols were implemented requiring documented reasonable suspicion before any immigration-related vehicle stop. Officers had to articulate specific facts, not vague generalizations. Body camera requirements were expanded. Footage had to be preserved for extended periods. Racial profiling training became mandatory, with real consequences for violations. The 287 Judy program underwent systematic reform. The program that allowed ICE to conduct immigration enforcement had been abused by agents who believed badges granted immunity from constitutional constraints. Kendra's case proved otherwise. Her case became legal precedent. Federal judges cited it in 3 subsequent civil rights lawsuits. Law schools taught it as an example of Fourth Amendment violations and the limits of qualified immunity. Police academies included it in training materials as a cautionary tale about the cost of racial profiling and constitutional violations. Kendra returned to work the following week. She continued prosecuting civil rights cases with the same precision and dedication. But she carried new understanding: the terror of having a hand move toward a weapon during an unlawful stop, the helplessness of metal handcuffs on innocent wrists, the humiliation of being mocked and dismissed. She used that understanding to prosecute future cases with even greater intensity, because she knew from direct experience exactly what was at stake when authority figures abused their power. The two agents who had laughed at her learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Justice requires consequences. Real consequences, the kind measured in millions of dollars and destroyed careers. The kind that proves, beyond any doubt, that no one is above the law.